Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Bebo. In this video, we're going to be looking at percent of change. So the main goal of this video is how do I use proportional relationships to solve percent of change problems? And what we can actually do is set up a proportion. So this percent of change, this is a ratio written as a percent that compares the change in quantity to the original amount. We're actually going to be looking at this again later in our unit of study on percents when we look at percent markups and discounts. That is a percent of change. But in this set of questions here, we're just going to be taking a look at essentially just generic percent of change problems. And with a percent of change, if the original amount is increased, then it's a percent of increase. If the original amount is decreased, then it is a percent of decrease. And we can use this proportion that we see here that says percent over 100, right? Because our percents are always out of 100, is the amount of change over the original amount. So we're going to be setting up a proportion to solve all of these questions, which is a really good method to solve these types of problems, which again, there's a lot of other methods out there that you can use to solve percent of change questions. This is a method that I use with my students. It tends to be the one that they understand the easiest, and so that's what we're going to see in this video. So setting up a proportion to solve our percent of change questions. Now, in this video, we're just going to look at examples where we're finding the percent of increase. So the original amount is going to be increased. So again, it's a percent of increase. And then I'll have a part 2 video where we'll look at percent of decrease. And then finally, a part 3 video where we'll look at some more complicated questions with percent of change problems. So in our first example here, we're going to find a percent of increase. The enrollment at a middle school increased from 650 students to 780 students in 5 years. What is the percent of increase in the number of students enrolled at the school? So my advice for students, every time that we learn this concept, is to take the time to write out that proportion that we just mentioned on the previous slide. So the percent out of 100 is equal to the amount of change, and we can just abbreviate it as the change over the original. I think that's super helpful because then we know what information we're trying to look for. We're trying to find the percent of increase, so this part of our proportion is going to be P over 100. But we do know the amount of change, right? My amount of change, I went from 650 to 780 students. So the amount of change we're going to find by doing 780 minus 650. And we're going to find that that's 130. So the amount of change is 130. So that's going to go into my proportion. And then what was the original? So where did you start? In this case, we started at 650. So that is my original amount. And then at this point, we're just going to do cross products and solve. So we're going to do 650 times P, 100 times 130. We're going to end up with this equation, 650p equals 13,000. And then we're going to take 13,000 and divide it by 650. So we're going to divide both sides by 650. And we're going to find that our percent increase was 20%. Now, sometimes problems will have you actually write, oh, it's a 20% increase. In this case, it is asking you what is the percent of increase, so it's implied that it was a 20% increase. I just tell my students it doesn't hurt to add that part to your answer just in case. You know, especially if you're doing like an online program, it might be looking for those keywords at the end of it. Some teachers do require it, so just make sure you read the directions or ask your teacher for clarification on whether or not you need to state if it's an increase or a decrease. So that's it for that question. So again, just remembering our proportion here, right? Percent over 100 equals change over original. That's what we're going to use for each of these next two examples. So example 2. Last month, Ty had 52 comic books. Now he has 61 comic books. What is the percent of increase rounded to the nearest percent in his comic book collection? So we're going to, once again, use this proportion. So my advice would be to write it out every time so you can make sure that you're setting it up correctly. So percent over 100 equals the amount of change, which we can just write it as change, over the original amount. Our percent is what we're trying to find, right? We're trying to find the percent of increase. So we're going to write P over 100 equals the change, which we can find by looking at our two values here. We went from 52 to 61, so the difference in those, right, 61 minus 52 is going to be 9. And so the amount of change was 9. And your starting value was 52. We were at 52, and then it went up to 61, so over 52. Now that I have my proportion set up, it's just a matter of doing cross products. 52 times P, 100 times 9. So we're going to have 52P equals 900, right? Because 9 times 100 is 100. And then we have one more step to solve this. Now that we have a one-step equation, that one step is to divide both sides by 52. So divide by 52, divide by 52, and then 900 divided by 52 ends up giving us an answer that's not very nice. We get P is approximately equal to 17.3076, right? It goes on. So this does tell us to round to the nearest percent. So the 0.3, right, that 3/10 that's there is going to tell me we're going to actually just keep it at 17. We're not going to round up. So our percentage is going to be approximately 17%. And again, this was an increase. So approximately a 17% increase in his comic book collection. All right, our last example on calculating percent of increase, and then like I said, make sure you check out the next videos for some more examples with percent change problems. In this one, it says the average cost of gas in 2000 was about $1.50 per gallon. Suppose you purchased gas for $3.30 per gallon. What is the percent of increase in the cost of a gallon of gas? So once again, let's go ahead and write down our proportion that we're working with, just so we can really keep in mind how this is set up. Again, it's your percent out of 100 equals the change, the amount of change, over the original amount. So when I take a look at this question, again, we're trying to find that percent of increase, so P is our unknown. The amount of change is going to be this $1.50 to $3.30, so we're going to be doing $3.30 minus the $1.50, and so we're going to find that that ends up being $1.80. And so $1.80 is the amount of change, so that's going to be on the top part of this ratio on this right side of our proportion. And then the original amount was $1.50, so the original amount was $1.50. All right, now we're going to do our cross product, so multiplying across and from each side of our proportion, so P times 150, $1.50, and then 100 times that $1.80. We're going to have 1 in 50 hundredths times P equals 100 times this 1.80, or 1 in 80 hundredths is actually going to end up making this 180. And then 180 divided by the 1 and 50 hundredths. So let me write my work here. So divide. We end up with our percent equaling 120. So it was a 120% increase in the cost of gas. So that's it for calculating percent of increase. Take a look at the next videos to see percent of decrease, as well as some more complicated percent of change problems. Thanks for watching.